Welcome to COOP Radio 102.7 FM CFRO. This is Monday Brown Bagger. My name is Reginald Angus Argue. I'm going to be archiving this on my website of www.reginaldangusargue.com. And the artist that you just heard is a local hip-hop artist by the name of Gemini of Conspirituality. And if anyone wants to look up the song, it's called Ambushed. Now, with that said, our first guest today, he's done, just to name a few of the books that he's written, The Fraud of Fraud, The Fraud of Money in Banking, The Conspiracy Fraud, and others. With this said, I'd like to introduce Jose Paulino.
Thank you. Thank you, Reginald. How's everything going?
Really good. Thank you so much for calling in, for agreeing to come on. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, before we talk about that one question we talked about prior to the interview here, could you talk a little bit about your experience within the stock market, where you worked, and just give us a brief history?
Yes. Starting around 2000, I started working on Wall Street. I worked actually, besides Wall Street itself, I worked on Broadway, 120 Broadway, which was the building where Spieler, the ex-governor, who was prosecuting all of the executives that we know of back in the day, Ken Lanham, worked in the same building that he did. Met him several times on the elevator, just in passing. Very nice guy. I'm not surprised that he was shafted the way he was by the Bush administration and set up the way he was. But, I worked on Wall Street for 4 years, so I do have Wall Street experience and banking experience as well.
And one thing you really wanted, right before the interview here, you and I were talking, and they said there's one important subject you really want to get into because you've heard many other interviews, and you don't feel that they've touched upon this, is that the banking information. Could you talk a little bit about that, what we talked about prior to the interview, so that the listening audience is aware of it?
Yes, absolutely. I think that within the truth movement, there's a big misconception, and we hear so many interviews and so many documentaries where they keep repeating the same things over and over again that are just not true. They're not accurate. It's not accurate information. And that is this notion that concerning fractional reserve banking, that if I deposit, let's say, $100 in a bank, that gives the bank the right now to lend out $1,000. This is incorrect. This is what, and I'll just touch up on it very briefly. I go into more detail in my book, The Fraud of Money in Banking. When you deposit $100 in a bank, it just says that when the reserve requirement is 10%, which is set by the Federal Reserve, it means that the bank has the right to lend out $90 of that $100 because it's only required to hold 10% of that money. Now, what the bank does when it lends that $90 is that it creates what's referred to as M3. You know, you have your money supply, you have M1, M2, and M3, M1 being hard cash, M3 being negotiable instruments. So the bank has created a negotiable instrument. And you also hear a lot of patriots and people in the truth movement talk about that you're financing your own loan. Well, in a way, I guess it would be best to say that you're funding your own loan. The bank actually finances the loan from the reserves and the deposits that its customers have put in the bank. But that's one thing that I think is really we need to really touch upon because there's a lot of misinformation concerning our banking system and the Federal Reserve itself.
And also, you and I were talking about the Federal Reserve in the past, and you were saying that there's a push right now to open up the books in the Federal Reserve. You were telling me that, you know, if this does come into being, there are a lot of people are going to be scared. Before I have you comment on that, in the past, I found out that apparently the United States has incorporated as a corporation back in the 30s, and at the same time, the Chinese government under the emperor, prior to the communist takeover, we're talking before World War II, when the Japanese were invading Manchuria, that apparently the Federal Reserve stepped in and took the Chinese emperor's treasury, deposited it in their bank accounts, spread it out through different countries, and the Chinese emperor's grandson came to collect the bill. Now, with all that said, could you tell us a little bit more on what else the people might find out if the books for the Federal Reserve were ever opened up? And then after you say that, we'll get into what other money systems we can create which would be more feasible. Right.
Well, for starters, I do hear that a lot, that how the U.S. is a corporation and the whole capital names thing and all that. And, all this is what we call esoteric information. It's things that we can't prove. So we cannot bring this information to people who are looking for truth. and are looking to get involved in this movement, we need to start off with good, solid information. Now, the United States government, just as any government, is set up to operate as a corporation, a nonprofit corporation for the benefit of the people. And the Constitution of the United States serves as its charter, its corporate charter, so to speak. Therefore, we know that the United States government, or the federal government, that is, cannot do anything that it's not incorporated to do within its charter, which is the Constitution. And this is why now in the United States, I don't know if you're aware of it there in Canada, there's a push where a lot of states are filing for their 10th Amendment rights. Now, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution basically tells the federal government that whatever is not in this Constitution, you don't have authority over. Therefore, this push now with the Real ID Act, and where the federal government is going to step in and start telling states how to institute personal identification cards or driver's license cards, that's not within their corporate charter, which is the Constitution. The Patriot Act and things of that nature is not within their boundary as well. It's outside of their corporate charter, which is the Constitution. Now, if we stick within that realm of reality and within that realm of information, now we can attack them. But if we start talking about how, well, I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that because the federal government's a corporation and I don't want to be part of that corporation, and, you know, my name isn't all capital letters here, so therefore I'm not the real person they're talking about in this lawsuit here, that's going to get us nowhere, and it has gotten us nowhere. So we have to talk about things that are solid. Now, as far as everyone talking about ordering the Federal Reserve, which is a big thing now, and us looking at their books, that's all good and dandy, but we need to understand the real culprits here. The real culprit is still the fact that we have an illegitimate government running the United States. And by that I mean that the Federal Reserve is only an agency of the United States. Now, people would like to put a lot of blame on the Federal Reserve, but even if we were to audit them and open up their books, what are we going to do? Because they are still not liable because the Congress or the law has given them immunity. So what we have to do is go to our public officials, those who are accountable to us, and tell them, look, this is how we want things done. And the first thing we need to do is abolish the Federal Reserve and make things open. Make things, because, look, in the United States, the government only makes money from collecting taxes. Although it works as a corporation, remember, it's a nonprofit corporation, and it collects our taxes, and we're supposed to know where our tax dollars are going. And this is one of the biggest things that they hide behind the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve, as we know, we're not allowed to know exactly what they're doing behind closed doors. I mean, not even our Congress is allowed to know what the board members are doing and that why they're setting certain policies, whether to loosen the money supply or tighten the money supply. And this is a big thing, where the American people have no idea where our economy is headed and why. So this is a big thing that I'd really like to get into, and I also discuss in my books. And we need to get into information that's solid, information that we can prove, and things that we can attack with. Because if we start getting into things that we can't prove, then when we go up to someone that has information, like someone who's in the banking industry, who's a real banker, and says, okay, tell me what you got, and we tell them, well, if I deposit $100 in the bank will lend $1,000. They're going to laugh and say, no, that's not correct. And then we're going to argue with them because this is what we've been told. And then it creates friction, and that person's going to turn away and say, you're full of crap, and walk away. And now we've lost possibly a good ally in the banking industry that can help us out.